we'll give him just a minute to join and then we'll get started. Tonight, we'll, just in terms of our agenda, we will open with a reminder of the code of conduct. And then Tammy, I presume, was the mayor going to say a few words at the beginning?
He was.
Great. So we'll hear from the mayor, and then we will go through a summary of what we heard at our open house and our subsequent online survey engagement in early May. And then we will go through the project proposals again and start to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the qualitative assessment that we've been working on. And then we have some interactive survey questions for the LPC members that we'll be looking for your feedback on as well, just to kind of help facilitate the discussion. And I think just get some further input on this list of projects. So.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, Mayor.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
How's it going?
Very well. We are excited that you can join us today. My name is Phil Schaefer. I'm the project manager for Stantec, working with New York Department of State and the other state agencies for the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. And we're very excited and happy to be working with the local planning committee and very glad that you could join us tonight.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor. My name is Ben Bedell. I'm a revitalization specialist with the Department of State, working on the Downtown Revitalization Initiative with Rochester, and pleased to have you aboard tonight and looking forward to the outcome of this process.
Thank you.
Great. So I think with that, we will go ahead and get started. Tammy, I think if you want to start with the code of conduct reminder, and then Mayor Evans will hand it off to you for a few words to the committee.
Sure, sounds good. Each local planning committee member is reminded of their obligation to disclose potential conflicts of interest with respect to any of the projects that might be discussed today. If you have a potential conflict of interest regarding a project you believe will be discussed during the meeting, please disclose it now or recuse yourself from any discussion or vote on that project. Anyone? Anyone?
I'll just mention as before, I serve on the board of the Landmark Society, so I will recuse myself for the Alta Vista discussion.
And the same for me.
Sounds good. Also, for example, you could state that you or a family member have a financial interest in the project, or that you're on the board of an organization, like Lauren just said, proposing the project. Thank you. Please inform the co-chairs during the meeting if the need to disclose a conflict arises unexpectedly, and of course, then recuse yourself from discussion or voting on that project.
Great. Thank you very much, Tammy. I appreciate that. And now I'll hand it off to Mayor Evans.
I'll be brief. Again, I just wanted to hop on and thank everyone for their attention and commitment to this very important process. I continue to look at Maine and Clinton regularly, the downtown area regularly, and I believe that this process, the projects that come out of this process, that we truly have the ability to really use it as a transformative tool for Rochester, and that the catalytic effect that this could have for the entire downtown region is something that could really continue to set Rochester on fire. I think it's important too that as we're looking at a lot of these projects and ones that we think we will pick as projects that we will move forward with, that we keep in mind all the work that's happening with Rockford Riverway, that we look at some of the work that's happening organically through private development in the private sector, and see how any of those projects will enhance that. And what I'm hoping for too is that we really address some of the blight that we have downtown. Because if you look at, for example, the four corners of downtown, we have some areas where a lot of investment has been made. Galena has made a huge investment near that corner, wind companies, and others. And I think that we want to make sure that those investments harness and support a lot of the stuff that's already been going on. And I think that we really have the ability to really be able to do that. So I'm really looking forward to this process. I appreciate all the work that everyone is putting in. I've said to my team here at City Hall that we want to make sure that we are being as upfront, as transparent, and as helpful as possible to make sure that there are not any hiccups on the city side. While we can't control any other entity or any other part of this project, what we do have control over is the way in which our city and members of the city decide how we operate. And we want to make sure that we are doing everything humanly possible to make sure that we move this forward. This is a A1 priority. And as we look at continuing to try to transform Rochester, we want to make sure that when we are bringing people downtown, that there are not certain sections of downtown that are embarrassing to us, that look like, you know, they've been bombed out. We have to make sure that we send a clear message that we want to transform that. And that's my hope. And I hope that we can get to that point. And I know that we'll get to that point because the people on this committee, on the local planning committee, get it and understand that. I'm preaching to the choir. You all understand this stuff already. It's not like, you know, I need to educate you on what we need to do here. So again, I just wanted to hop on. Thank you for your support on this. If there's anything that you need from me in particular, please let Tammy know. And we're happy to make sure that we oblige there. But I think we are just so blessed to have this initial $10 million. And I see this as seed funding. I think we plant the seeds of this $10 million. It's going to germinate and then it'll end up being $100 million because of all of the other private investment that we have as an opportunity if we dot our I's and cross our T's on this. So I'm excited and thank you. And Phil, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Evans. We really appreciate your perspective on things and your leadership with the city, and we're excited about this opportunity. And I think the local planning committee has a lot of good work ahead of itself and looking at these project proposals, and we're really excited to get into that to recommend the list of projects to the state. So this is been a great process so far. Look forward to continue it tonight and over the next couple of months, working towards, again, just as a reminder, our end of July final strategic investment plan for downtown with that list of projects that the local planning committee will be recommending to the state for DRI consideration. So good work ahead, lots of excitement. And with that, we will get into our meeting tonight. So I had mentioned at the beginning, we've covered just a reminder of the code of conduct. We have a few planning updates to share, most notably input from our second public meeting at the beginning of May and a follow-up online engagement opportunity. Then really the bulk of this meeting is going back to discuss the project proposals, which we introduced at the last meeting. We have just some updates to share on our analysis focused tonight, mostly on more of the qualitative aspects of those. And then we'll be looking for input from LPC members as part of the invitation to tonight's meeting. You should have a link to a menti.com website. You can follow along either on your computer or on your phone. And as we get to a slide after each of the project proposal slides, there'll be 2 survey questions where we will be asking for your input and use that as kind of a jumping off point for some discussions. We look forward to hearing from all of you in that survey. And then just as a reminder, at the end of the meeting, the last 15 minutes, we will have a public comment period. So for anyone who is a member of the public listening into this, we look forward to any comments you may have at that point.
As a matter of process, shouldn't I get off totally if you are starting discussing the Alta Vista project?
In the past, you certainly can if you would feel most comfortable that way. Otherwise, we would just ask that you remain quiet and refrain from any commenting during that discussion. So we can leave it up to you. We'll be aiming to spend 5 or so minutes per project, just since we have a lot to get through in a limited amount of time. So we'll leave that to you. As you've noted your conflict, obviously, that is important.
Okay, thanks.
So to start off with a couple of planning updates, we had our second public meeting back on May 4th at MCC. We had total of just over 60 people online and in person, which was a great turnout, and had a lot of good conversation with people both in person as well as online in the discussion around the project proposals. So it was really, I think, just got a general sense of excitement from people who were participating about the project proposals that they were hearing about, some good questions, but also, a lot of support as well. So that was a great opportunity. And as I mentioned, we also then had a survey available online together with the project proposal posters and the presentation from that meeting. So we were able to hear from more people after the meeting as well. So trying to reach people both in person and online. And the two main ways that we were looking to hear from people, one was from a survey with a couple of simple questions. And then second one, basically giving people $10 million in DRI funds and asking them, which of these projects would you fund to help inform our discussion. So just a general summary of some of the comments that we got. There were several topics or issues where there was kind of a lot of general agreement. And I think one notable one, which has been brought up in past local planning committee meetings, is about really kind of the type of environment we're looking to foster in downtown and particularly in the DRI area. So there were some comments about the types of commercial tenants that are being recruited there. And so this is something that we can make sure is emphasized in the strategic investment plan, so that as project sponsors are advancing their projects, they see this reflected, that there really is a thoughtfulness to the types of businesses that are there, and being thoughtful about the type of culture being created downtown. There were also then some issues where we kind of had split opinions, and I think this has also come up on particularly the last LPC meeting. For example, one of those is the scale of projects that should be funded. There were some comments we received about the best options for DRI funding being those big ones that are catalyzing downtown with lots of new units, not just facade improvements. But then we also heard that DRI should really be used to prioritize maybe the smaller projects, but the ones that are really complicated and complex, that have been a roadblock for a long time, but that might have a bigger sort of catalytic impact than their size might necessarily dictate. So similar to some of the comments and discussion we had at the last LPC meeting, and that I suspect we will also have tonight and at some of our upcoming ones. So the public, similarly has differing opinions on that. And then also, kind of where these potential projects would be located. Lots of comments about creating a critical mass, focusing in that block on between Clinton, Main, and St. Paul. And then other comments saying, well, let's spread this opportunity out across the DRI area, try to encourage and catalyze additional investment in other parts of the downtown and the DRI area. So, again, I think just kind of interesting points from the survey comments and the comments at the meeting. As we said at that meeting, and again tonight, community input is a very important part of this, but as we'll talk about in just a few minutes here, there are a number of different factors we're evaluating. And so it is not, it's an important factor, it's not the only one. And so we do want to keep that in mind. So two quick, just sort of interesting summaries of what we heard. One was we asked in the survey questions, people to evaluate projects on, what they felt their transformative potential was to really, make a big noticeable change in downtown, and how well they thought the project aligned with the DRI goals and vision. So there were two separate questions, but it was interesting to sort of plot those results as you see on the left here. Projects in the top right are ones that were generally rated as having a very high transformative potential, and were also very strongly aligned with DRI goals and the vision. projects towards the bottom left are ones that were generally seen as having less transformative potential and less aligned with the DRI goals and vision. And so you see that Main Street Commons and the corner of Main and Clinton rated as the most transformative and the most aligned with goals and visions. And then the projects kind of trailing off towards the bottom left there. So again, this is kind of a helpful bit of information in terms of how the public was perceiving those project proposals at the meeting and afterwards. And I think helpful to kind of for the committee members to just take into consideration. And then the results of the DRI Bucks voting exercise was also kind of interesting. What this charts here on the left is basically how many multiples of the DRI request were the dollars in the envelope, I guess is hopefully a clear way to put it. So if a project was asking for $1 million in DRI request and it had 10 million in the envelope, that would be a 10x kind of multiplier or factor. So you see those projects charted here. The Commons, Main Street Commons was also a project that received the most DRI Bucks allocations from participants. But what is kind of an interesting point here is that although there was a sense that some of those bigger projects with more units might be more transformative or be more exciting, they tended to have fewer DRI Bucks allocations. For example, as you see on the right there, like the Cox Building, the Granite Atrium Gateway buildings, those are projects that are proposing a lot of units, but also a higher DRI request. And so that's, again, not a decisive factor, but I think interesting because it is that trade-off of we have a limited 9.7 million to ultimately be awarded here. And so do we want to spend that on one or a couple larger projects or several smaller projects? So it was interesting to sort of see how the public perceived that. So just again, kind of interesting summary of findings from the meetings. Any questions or comments on the public meeting, the input that we heard, these couple of slides summarizing the feedback? Great.
I had a question.
Sure.
Sorry. Could you go back for a sec?
Yes.
So the health center is in the middle, although it appears that it received, quantitatively a large number of votes to spend, the money on it. Why is it in the position that it's in?
We're just deciding how to organize this. We ultimately went by the number of online responses. And this was in part because particularly in the in-person, there were definitely a couple of project proponents floating around really advocating for their projects, which is not a bad thing, but we did want to take that into consideration. The health center was one. We'll talk more about this as we get into the project proposal discussion. I think there was definitely a lot of interest in it sort of addressing the need for more healthcare options downtown, but also some concerns about I think just the mission-driven nature of it and some other things. So a little of both sides there, but that's why it is where it is there.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or comments?
And this was strictly based on opinion and interest in these particular projects. I mean, were they evaluating on all of the factors that we're looking at, or was it very just opinion driven?
This was more right. This was more asking people to respond to the project proposal summaries that were presented at the meeting and in the posters that were online. So it was very much a summary of kind of the key project characteristics for projects that had renderings. Those were included, some of the key stats in terms of number of units or things like that. So it's an opinion based on sort of that snapshot of the project. And I'm sure many people as they were doing this were responding kind of to what seemed most exciting to them. So probably not taking into account all of the factors that our team and the LPC is evaluating.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Two other just quick updates. Several members of the local planning committee took a walk on Monday around the DRI area. They were joined by city staff and a couple of local historians to learn a little bit more about the history of this part of downtown and some of the specific buildings that have project proposals that we're considering. And also just to get a sense of, where the projects are related to one another and how they tie into some of the other investments in downtown. So I think it was a really helpful tour. You see some takeaways there from some of the conversation, both that, this area, it needs help. That's why it is a DRI community and a DRI area. Discussion during the tour of, preference for some of the bigger impact projects, and then just agreement that addressing Main Street is a critical piece of this. So for anyone who was on the walking tour, I'd love to just hear if there were anything else that, stood out as notable to you on the tour, or anything that you thought was particularly interesting that you'd want to bring back and share with the whole committee.
Phil, hi, this is Dana.
Hi, Dana.
I just wanted to say just a couple of quick things. It was a very good tour. I know that the people who attended at the end expressed their appreciation for having had it, and that they believed that they had learned quite a bit about not just current conditions, but historic conditions, and really got a better sense of the scale and the scope of the DRI area. Because when you look at it on a map, I mean, it looks like one thing, but when you actually get out on the street and walk it, it feels very different. So I thought it was a great opportunity to really understand the area better, and that seemed to be the sense that I got from the folks that participated.
And if I would add also that the massing on Main Street between St. Paul and Clinton is extremely apparent when you're out there. It is very long, and it's not a human scale right now, and you really feel that when you walk that whole block. You don't always think about it as you're passing around downtown, but on this walk, I think it was very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just add to that. Yeah, sorry, Heidi. No, I would just add to that in the commissioner's comments as well. I think having that perspective of the scale and really just sort of the energy, right? There's so much different energy moving from, one corner of that space to the other. So to think about the types of projects, right, and the impact that they would have specifically in those spaces, it was really good to just feel that. Obviously, it was a very busy time of the day as folks are coming in and out for work. So it's good to experience that as well. In addition to what's been said about sort of the historical context, some of these buildings look the same virtually as they did, decades ago. And so all things considered, I think it was very helpful to be out there and think about the projects actually in the space.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other thoughts or takeaways from the tour? Good, and thanks again to Dana for helping to organize that and getting the local history perspective as well. I think that was just a great opportunity for committee members, and I know it was one of the things that came out of our last meeting. So great that we were able to do it, and a much better day for the tour, I think, than the Monday before last, which is when it had been originally scheduled. So. And then just the last quick update, a reminder notice to LPC members, but also for project sponsors that the governor has now opened the next round of the consolidated funding application. This is important and I think helpful information to consider. As we've discussed before, we have 13 essentially project proposals for a total of over 29 million in requested DRI funds. The committee is asked to whittle that down to around 15 million, and the state will make the final award of the 9.7 million. So there's going to be a lot of good projects that are not selected for DRI funding, but sources like the CFA and others are very good sources to help those projects go forward. And in the strategic investment plan that we'll be developing for the end of July, even projects that aren't recommended for DRI funding will still be included in that plan as, part of this discussion as a community priority, maybe not as high a priority as the recommended projects, but still important. And so that can help their application for the CFA rounds or for other funding sources as well. So just wanted to note that here. You see the website information available as well. So
I did have, if you don't mind, I did have a question that came out of the tour the other night.
Sure.
One of the points of conversation was, if we get through this process and we award the funds to certain projects, and then for some reason those projects can't go forward or hit roadblocks or aren't able to make the timelines discussed or required by the state for this particular funding, what happens to those funds? Do they go away? Can they get rolled into other projects? Is there a reconvening to reallocate funds? Just wondering if you've seen that happen before, and what that looks like, if for some reason that those projects can't go forward.
Lauren, that's a good question. So it does happen from time to time. For whatever reason, the project does not move forward. And if something like that happens and it's canceled, we have a list of recommended projects from this body.
Okay.
We can award to the next available project if it's still a viable project. So that's how we proceed, and it's just award to the next one in line. So we typically go for, if there's a project that was underfunded for some reason, or the next available project that was not funded but recommended by the LPC.
Is that retroactive if some of that work has already been done at that point, or is it the project has
if the project's begun and started?
Yeah.
It would just take some work on both ends to see if it's still viable and workable with DRI.
Okay.
We would find a way to make it happen, but if it's been funded like through a CFA project and it's moving forward, more than likely the next one in line would come forward.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I would also have a regional council perspective. It's the same thing. If one project dies in a vine, usually there's a vote for reallocating the money, and the state's been very good about keeping the money in the region. So it's been really true with past CFA and even those not in the CFA process with the regional council.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. That's my biggest concern. I want to see those dollars stay here.
And that's really the main reason why the committee is asked to recommend a list of projects that totals closer to 15 or so million, rather than saying, here's exactly where we want the 9.7 to go. That gives the state the ability to pivot if needed. So that's a great question. And with that, we will transition over to our project proposal discussion. So as we had introduced at the last meeting with the project proposals, there are a number of different criteria that we are taking into consideration as we evaluate these projects. And so our team of consultants has been reaching out to project sponsors for additional information, for follow-up phone calls. That is all kind of in the works now to get more information where we need it, to straighten out questions where those may exist. And we're kind of looking at these four main categories of project feasibility, the potential impact of that project, the cost benefit of that, which also includes, demonstrating that DRI funds really are needed as sort of the last money in to make that project happen, and then public support as well. So there's four kind of main buckets of evaluation criteria that we're looking at. All of these will be spelled out in the project profiles. Each project that's recommended for funding will have information for each of these sort of presented, whether that's the financial numbers from the pro forma or construction cost estimates, or more general statements about how it aligns with DRI goals and visions or its transformative impact. All of that is part of those project profiles. As I mentioned, tonight we're focusing more on some of the qualitative ones, and that's what our discussion will be around. And then our next meeting coming up in a few weeks will be focused more on some of the quantitative ones. We'll have more findings from our team who's been looking at the pro formas and the cost estimates and things like that. So we'll have kind of the next layer of analysis at that meeting. So before I jump into these, similar to the last meeting, we'll have 1 or 2 slides on each of the project proposals we've received. We'll talk about any updates we've gotten, talk about some of the qualitative findings that we've come to so far, and then we will pop up that mentee poll slide. So now is the opportunity, if you have your phone or another screen on your computer, you can pull up the invitation for this meeting. And this is, I'm speaking here to our local planning committee members. You can go to that meeting invitation, go to that link, and should actually, and I'm kind of following along on my phone here, it'll actually go through the slides on your phone, the same as we're doing here on the screen. And when we get to the poll slides, you'll see a question that you'll be able to vote on. There's 2 questions for each of the projects. The results should, hopefully, fingers crossed if technology works, flash up on the screen here. And then we can talk a little bit about that. And we really do want all of the LPC members to participate in those polls. Let us know what you think, so that we can kind of get kind of gauge the temperature of the committee on a couple of these questions in addition to our discussion. So that's what we'll be going through over next hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes as we go through this. Pause real quick here. So the first project on our list here, and again, this list is in no particular order, is the Alta Vista project, which is out by St. Joseph's Park. This has a DRI request of 2 million, of which 1.85 million would go towards the building and 150,000 towards some improvements in St. Joseph's Park. This is supporting a total project cost of 32 million to take some empty vacant parking lots and turn those into 76 new affordable residents, including 14 that are specifically designated as supportive housing. In this part of particularly the study area and the downtown areas was mentioned on the last call, that is a little further away from sort of the center of gravity of some other investments that have happened. One of the questions at the last LPC meeting, which we have got some more information on, was about the project cost and particularly the DRI request. The sponsor had been responding to a city RFP for this property last year, had submitted a sources and uses statement that had all of the costs covered with their assumptions about public and private financing sources. And so the question was sort of asked, well, is this, why now are they coming forward with a request for additional funds for DRI? And the answer that we got back was that since then been 2 major changes, the biggest of which really has been changing from the type of low-income housing tax credit that they're including in their funding sources. So they were advised to switch from the 4% tax credits to the 9%. And so that has changed their project costs. But then also, and this, as we're discovering, is kind of a struggle with a lot of development projects these days, is just the volatility and the cost of labor and materials. So just in this few months since that initial application to the city, they've seen costs go up, and so they need to cover those. So that hopefully provides a little bit more information to the committee in terms of this project, why it's now coming forward for DRI, requesting DRI funds. A couple other things, just as we're looking through this, leverage is always something we talked about, and the mayor mentioned this in his introduction, taking this 9.7 million in DRI funds and turning that into, 100 million or more in private financing. And so this has about a 15 times leverage, the 2 million in DRI requests leveraging almost 30 million in private and other public funding sources to create those 76 units and to help address the DRI's decarbonization goals, which are new with this round. The building would have high efficiency design, so all electric ground source heat pumps, electric vehicle charging, solar panels, a number of other features. So they are, trying to address that energy efficiency and decarbonization goal as well. certainly hits on a couple of our DRI goals, particularly the mixed use and mixed income housing. Number of comments about this site from the public meeting and public feedback, excitement about an empty site being put back to use, interest in particularly the supportive housing to address a need, not just downtown, but citywide. Questions about some of the improvements to St. Joseph's Park. Those improvements include new sidewalks, some lighting, potentially improvements to water and some other, a fountain, I believe, some other kind of infrastructure type improvements so that the park can still, meet visitor needs as well as the landmark society needs. So that is kind of where we're at with this project. Now I'm going to switch over to the first of our poll voting pages. So for committee members, if you have that Menti link up, you should now see 2 questions here. The first to kind of rate how well this project supports downtown revitalization, thinking about our DRI goals and just more broadly, even across all of downtown. And then kind of the cost benefit. What's your opinion of how well this project's transformative potential justifies its, price tag or its kind of its DRI request? So as
Hey,
people
Phil.
vote,
Oh,
we
I'm
should
sorry.
start to see some results come in here. Yes.
I was wondering that might mess up your the Mentimeter. I was gonna say if you could put the original project summary up because I forgot how much the exact total was.
It was a $2 million request for a just over $32 million project.
Got it. Thank you.
I think if I do flip back, it'll accidentally.
Oh, yeah.
close
I'll
voting.
pay more attention to the numbers for the next one.
As before mentioned, I'm going to abstain from voting on this one.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Got a handful of votes coming in here. I think that's about the LPC members that we have. I don't have the roster up right now. So I see here that on the cost benefit side, ranking pretty highly at a 3.9. Revitalization goals just a bit lower at 3.4. Does anybody want to just very briefly share kind of your thoughts on either of these questions, whether you rated it higher than this or lower than this, just any thoughts that you would share with the group? We're gonna try to force you to discuss this. This was the goal of the polls. We wanted to get some conversation out there.
I mean, this is just my personal opinion, and this does not reflect the city of Rochester proper. But the project, I think, will be transformative, but I think it's the location for me because it's almost like downtown adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
It's downtown. I mean, it is downtown, but it's not. When you think downtown, you don't think that part of downtown. So it's revitalizing. It's just not downtown, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Lisa. I have a comment to also address that.
Sure.
So I guess I'm thinking one step ahead of Main Street transformation. I'm thinking inner loop also, which this project is right smack next to the inner loop.
Mm-hmm.
Will, connect Main, in effect, it could drive people and interest into downtown when the inner loop is transformed into whatever it's going to be. So I don't know. Granted, it's off Main Street, but it's a connector is probably the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate that point, Lisa. That hadn't occurred to me, but that makes a lot of sense. And what you said, Tammy, really resonates with me. I guess one of the driving considerations for me as I think about this project in the context of some of the other proposals is that this would involve developing a site that is currently vacant. And I think about
from my perspective, as I think about the universe of proposals, the opportunity to address some existing blight in our current built environment. And at the same time, and Heidi alluded to this earlier in the general conversation, having an opportunity to improve the human scale and the walkability of the immediate neighborhood. So, that doesn't make this project better or worse. It's just as I considered this project, that is something that is somewhat unique in the universe of proposals that we're considering here.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are all great points as well. I would just add, thinking about walking the site the other day, the focus is sort of the crux with Main and Clinton right there, and they increase that walkability and that capacity and that vibrancy. I think a way to do that is not only to address that corridor, sort of the first rung outside of that, to create a buffer as well. And so this would be doing that, as Joe said, in an area that's pretty vacant. And although there's, a nice park, it's just really ripe with potential. It'd be great to have the human element there.
Mm-hmm. I think those are all very good points and reflect sort of what we were hearing from the public survey as well, that question of expanding sort of the revitalization impact throughout the whole DRI area versus really focusing that. So I think these were all good points here.
I'd like to add that I think one of the difficulties for the committee and all of us involved in trying to make choices in terms of coming up with the recommended projects is that 10 million is oddly not a lot of money. It's 9.7, but it's not a lot of money in a community as dense and vertical as this one. So when we've got a small handful of projects that are very large in scale, and I think that is going to be one of the most difficult sets of decisions, will be around how much for a very large project that can suck a pretty significant percentage of that 9.7. And does it have enough impact and transformational and catalytic aspect to it that it's worth doing that? And to me, that's going to be one of the tough ones here, is that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right that as you start to look at the DRI request here, you realize that 9.7 does go pretty fast. And so we want to be thoughtful about the projects that are ultimately included in that list of 15 or so $1 million in funding, and really trying to get the biggest bang for the buck. All right. So the next project then, this is the corner of Main and Clinton. I think for a number of people, definitely a focal point for improvement downtown, part of the city's original DRI application. A lot of comments of this or about this from the public meeting in early May. As we mentioned before, we're kind of in the unique scenario of having two project proposals for the same set of 4 buildings. So we've been talking with both of the project sponsors. They are continuing to work on this to figure out the site control and some other kind of threshold issues here. So we'll hopefully have more to report back on at the next meeting. But for the time being, we're sort of thinking of this as kind of one, if not project, it's at least sort of one site, obviously. So there's sort of like maybe it's a plan A, plan B, or something like that. So we'll have some more clarity, I think, by the next meeting. But I think some of the key pieces here, I mean, in terms of the feasibility, the site control is one of those threshold issues that needs to be resolved. From the cost benefit, this is, I think, a great illustration, Heidi, of what you were just mentioning, that, the DRI request is a larger proportion of the total project cost, because these buildings in both project proposals would be adaptively reusing the existing buildings. They're only contemplating 10 to 12 housing units on the upper floors, but it's also historically a very important corner downtown. And as I mentioned, it's part of the whole impetus for applying for DRI here. It certainly meets a number of DRI goals about revitalizing the East Main Street corridor, as well as those connective corridors. You know, it would, since it wraps around the corner there, it makes a big impact on Clinton as well, addresses the vacancy and blight along Main Street. So it hits a lot of those goals and could certainly have a very large catalytic effect. And so I think that the question for the LPC to grapple with is, you know, the size of the DRI request relative to, you know, the number of units, but also the importance of this corner. And, you know, that request relative to the total 9.7 million. You see at the bottom there, public feedback on both sides of the issue. You know, can't think of a more important and critical building for the revitalization of downtown. Let's do it. Versus so much money, so few units. Maybe this isn't the one. So I think we've heard from both sides on the public for this. Very interested to hear from the committee on this. And then as people are voting too, if you have just thoughts on this question of, you know, impact and transformative potential and revitalization, would love to hear those, because I think this is one of those projects where these questions really do come to the fore. See as the votes start to come in here. Looks like just about everybody has voted so far. So who would like to talk a little bit about why they rated the project on either impact or cost benefit the way they did? I'd love to hear kind of viewpoints on either side, particularly the cost benefit ones. Does anybody want to share some thoughts on that?
I would just say, you know, I think historically the price tag on a project like this with a small yield of units has been the challenging factor to make anything really happen at this site. So, you know, it is incredibly important to our downtown core for this corner to be revitalized, and with the understanding that that's going to take quite a substantial amount of money to make the project make sense for any developer who might be interested. Site control aside, obviously that's a non-starter for anyone. If they don't have site control, we can't approve funding. But you know, I do think that there's a little bit of understanding of market and how this adaptive reuse would be extremely costly with a small yield on units. Mm-hmm. Heidi, you're nodding. That's your opinion as well.
Yeah, that's my opinion as well. That's one of the concerns that I have, is that it eats up at the highest level of request, 5 million. It eats up so much of this budget. But we also know that this is a high impact blight corner. And it's the one area that people for years have said, we've got to do something about the northwest corner of Main and Clinton. So that's why I think these projects have so much of an appeal. But we don't have a lot of money to distribute. So it's going to wait. Question about that. Is it possible that we end up recommending an amount for a particular project that's less than what they're asking for?
That is potential. One of the things that our team is looking at is, you know, their assumptions in their pro forma and, you know, around construction costs to, you know, the ability they're able to estimate them at this stage of design, to make sure that the request is justifiable. And so if our analysis, you know, were to come back that we had some questions about some assumptions, there certainly have been instances in the past that through this process, the sponsor will come back with a slightly lower request. And then in the state's evaluation of the process, kind of the second phase of this award process, they also negotiate with sponsors, and there have been instances where projects are awarded some amount less than the full amount. That's always done with an eye to, you don't want to lower that DRI amount to the point where the project is no longer viable either. So it is looking at those project financials. So that's one of the things our team is trying to, get some more information from the sponsors, understand their assumptions to see if there is any, wiggle room there. So yes, I guess the short answer to your question.
Well, and in addition to that, are you
sorry.
guys looking at alternative sources of funding? The main one, of course, being CFA. Is that part of your analysis, and is that something that is being looked at with each, particularly the bigger price tagged projects?
Right. So whether that's, pairing DRI with another funding source to lower the DRI request, or if there are, obviously a lot of these projects qualify for a lot of other state funding sources from HCR, CFA, and other sources. So that's part of it as well, too, to understand where there might be other avenues.
And then Phil, also this profile combines the two, right? So can you break down what each individual ask was? Or do you have that in front of you?
Sure. So the two project proposals, one was received by Home Leasing, who is a developer who has two, I'll call them kind of inside buildings closest, on Main Street, closest to the river, working to get site control of those two buildings and the two on the corner. That request from Home Leasing was for $5 million out of a total project cost of, I think it was about $10.5 million, maybe. They, in their project proposal, mentioned including some affordable units within that, as well as some energy efficiency design features. The other project proposal was submitted by the current owner of the two buildings on the corner. So he has site control of half of those four buildings, and in the proposal is working to negotiate with either the current property owner or Home Leasing on the other two. That his request was for the 3.6 million or so out of a total project cost of, I believe it was 9.6 or 10 million, somewhere in that range. Very similar number of units, ground floor commercial space. So in that way, the proposals were pretty similar.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think the comments around this, it's as we go through these projects, one by one, we talk about each of the project features, but then also kind of pull back and look at the collection of projects to see how they sort of support each other, build towards a critical mass. And so that can also help us as we start to shape this list of projects, I think, is, the individual project merits, but also how the slate of recommended projects would work together.
At what point, Phil, do we look at capacity of developers and viability of projects, in terms of who's capable of completing the projects as submitted?
That's part of what our team is going through now. All of the project sponsors have submitted sort of qualifications as part of their proposal package. So in terms of, relative projects, depth of experience, things like that. We do have a couple follow-up questions into sponsors just to learn more where we need it. So we'll have more of a report on that at the next meeting, but that's part of what our team's going through now, part of what will be documented in the project profiles.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh,
sure.
Comment. I'm just going to throw this out there. If we don't fix Maine and Clinton with this money, the whole of Rochester is going to be scratching their heads, wondering what the heck was this all about. So I'm just putting it out to this committee that that's going to be the perception. That's all I have to say.
I think it's been pretty clear from the beginning that this is a priority. This has been a long-standing problem. The DRI is a great opportunity to try to do something here. And so, our team, as we're evaluating the proposals and seeing where this shakes out with the sponsors and their negotiations, it's an important opportunity. I think that's something for the LPC to definitely consider. That is definitely a big one here, I think. Exciting opportunity and a lot to consider. Moving along now, the next project on our list is the Main Street Commons. This is one of 2 projects submitted by the City of Rochester, and this would open up a pedestrian passage at a midpoint on Main Street to provide kind of a scale to the block that is similar to what you see in other parts of downtown. This actually involves acquiring an existing building and tearing it down to create this outdoor space that could be used for different types of event programming, seating, landscaping, spill out space for the 2 adjacent buildings and the tenants in that. The DRI request is for 1.3 million out of a total project cost estimated at around 1.5. Publicly led projects oftentimes do have a higher percentage of DRI requests to the total project cost. That's not uncommon. So we do see that here. The property in question here, it's under contract. So the city is working to acquire that by, I believe, the end of June. So that's in the process and kind of is anticipated. Cost benefit here, is that it's one of 2 projects focused on, general public realm improvements. It creates an amenity for other DRI projects as well as just adjacent buildings, and does start to address kind of the pedestrian scale of downtown and the Main Street corridor. So it addresses a couple of our DRI goals and strategies. As I mentioned earlier, it scored the highest both in transformative potential and DRI goal alignment in our public survey. There's a lot of excitement around the project, I think. There were a couple of comments about the amount of the DRI requests, the total project cost. As I mentioned, that's not really uncommon for public sector projects. So here, what are committee members' thoughts on the impact and the cost benefit of this particular project? As people are voting here, if people just want to speak up and talk a little bit about their perspective on this. Looks like most people have voted now. Any thoughts in terms of the impact on this, supporting downtown revitalization, pedestrian walkability, some of our other goals, or just its transformative potential? We're proposing, the project sponsor here is proposing to tear down an existing building and create, a publicly accessible space through the block.
I can chime in. I think this project, the public feedback really well encapsulated what I feel too, which is that the cost is right. It seems like we can really make a big improvement with while utilizing, just over a tenth of the overall funding. I think it will improve accessibility in the space, walkability, and just will really help add to the overall vibrancy, assuming it can be programmed and, and have the right activities and events taking place there.
Mm-hmm. I would agree 100% with that. It does give us a new space to talk about programming, but with a lot of the other work going on right now, that structure is expected to be in place. So to me, this is one of the most important projects proposed is this one. I think this will make a very big difference in the human scale of that entire block, and it will create sight lines that offer opportunities on Division Street, which was another set of interesting opportunities that I know you're going to talk about shortly. But yeah, I thought this project was a terrific project from my point of view.
I too agree totally with Heidi's assessment. I think you break that block up and you create a new environment, totally transformative in that area.
All right.
I think it's also an opportunity to bring in green space, right? Plantings and maybe a couple trees and things that really soften the concrete, right? That we have so much of on the street.
Absolutely. And that, one of our DRI goals and strategies is about creating a green public realm that also, plays into stormwater runoff and, naturally absorbing some of that, replacing a building where all of that stormwater runoff is going straight into the sewers, but instead being able to be absorbed by green spaces. So it's a space that can address, I think, a couple of different goals here. Good. There seems to be a lot of, I think, general excitement and interest in this project for a number of reasons. Next project on our list is the second City of Rochester project. This is to create Mortimer Plaza, which is improving the sort of the back entrance of the Mortimer Street garage that you see in the picture there, to improve that with really a couple of main purposes. One is to create or to locate a couple of electric vehicle charging stations, as well as electric vehicle car share, to help cut down on individual car ownership downtown. And then the second part of this is the shared dumpster enclosure on the right, which is does not sound very exciting, but the purposes they described in the project proposal is to create a consolidated location for all of the individual dumpsters that are currently along Division Street and contribute to it feeling very much like a back alley and not a place that you really want to walk or spend any time on. Actually bringing those all together in one location as sort of a first step in making some further improvements there. This is on land the city already owns, so site control is not an issue. The electric vehicle charging stations would obviously address some of the decarbonization goals. As I mentioned, it's part of the sort of larger and longer term vision for making some improvements to the Division Street streetscape. Public feedback, again, kind of people drawing their attention to different things. One, great support to address the trash on Division Street needs to be addressed. Others thinking there are not enough electric vehicle charging stations or too much emphasis on auto travel. So I think hearing both sides of it in our public feedback, and would now like to hear from our committee members here. As the votes are coming in, if anyone wants to share your thoughts or your reasonings about why you rated this the way you did. Just looking at the results here, this one's maybe a little more middle of the road in both impact and cost benefit here. Anybody want to share thoughts on this one?
I wonder about the feasibility of the trash, the combined trash, if they're trying to get shared or independent garbage off of Division Street, are those businesses going to be willing to make the trek to be able to do that? And is that, substantial enough for for all of those buildings.
And I think,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that a similar thought was expressed at the last LPC committee meeting as well, just the logistics of, bringing trash from the buildings out to the central location in terms of the street and the sidewalk that's there today. But go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm trying to visualize it, and I don't know that the trash that exists there today would exist if other DRI projects were funded. I think it would be a different configuration, I think. So I don't think that would be as much of an issue.
Yeah, thank you.
To me, this project feels like, when you buy a house and then you find out that you have to replace the hot water heater, and like you have to do it. You don't really, it's not the exciting. It's not like a new kitchen or a new bathroom, but it's got to get done. Like this feels like one of those, like, it's nice, it's structurally good, but it doesn't have the same excitement. And really, I think also, like, going back to Lisa, I think your point earlier, that kind of that visual impact to show people of like really how the dollars are being invested. I know it's I think probably the least amount of dollars requested for the RI, but just in terms of that, impact of just visually, it doesn't really have as much pizzazz.
I
didn't think I'd get to use the word pizzazz tonight, but there we have it.
There you go. Yeah, I think, these are all, again, important issues to be thinking through. And Tammy, to your point, also thinking about how the different projects all relate to each other as part of a package too. None of these will be completed in a vacuum, but they're, hopefully both from DRI and other funding sources will be a lot of activity and transformation happening in this area in the next few years. And so, what role do each of the projects have in that? I think that's an important kind of broader perspective to keep in mind as we go through project by project here. Next up is the digital media project proposal for the corner of Main and Clinton. So this is actually the third proposal we had for the same corner. This one is requesting $500,000 out of a total cost of just over $1 million. The project sponsor, one of their updates was this rendering of kind of how those billboards, could potentially look on these buildings. They've mentioned that this is part of a broader portfolio of signage across the city that they're working on. In terms of feasibility, one of their project partners is, does control the site. However, the city's design standards, as you look at the zoning and the signage requirements, they do not allow for digital signs the way they're rendered like this, both in terms of where they're located and the square footage of them and the lighting and other elements. So, that would be part of the permitting process that it would have to go through. That would just raise some uncertainty about the project. It does address, one of our goals about, helping to promote existing institutions and events and neighborhood activities, things like that. The project sponsor talks about the signage being programmed with local news and event promotions and things like that, so that it is kind of an attraction both for people passing by on their day-to-day trip through downtown, learning about the festival that's coming up next weekend or something like that, but also for visitors who are new to Rochester to learn something about the city. So they do talk about that in their proposal. And you see some of the feedback from the public survey about, views from nearby buildings, what that does for the buildings themselves. Certainly that would have an impact on their reuse, which we discussed a little bit at the last meeting as well. So, just some of the issues to evaluate and consider with this particular project.
I actually have a question about that.
Sure.
There's also a right-of-way issue because this Rock City, what is it called, leasing? They don't own the building, right?
They are a partner with the current property owner. So they're one of the co-sponsors for their application for the
Gotcha.
actual redevelopment of the building.
And I probably asked that before, but I forgot. Thank you.
Not a problem.
So just to recap what we talked about at a prior meeting, if this project were to be funded, this would preclude housing conversion in that building.
The way that it is rendered, and we are still trying to get some more clarity on that from the sponsor. The way that it's rendered, at least the second floor looks like it would still be visible for housing. I think the sponsor did have some language about signage technology that would allow kind of limited or obstructed views through the signage, at least at certain points. So that is one we're trying to nail down, just to what extent it does impact the usability of the building behind it. I think we've heard from most people here, so this is one that seems to be rating a bit lower, both on the impact and the cost benefit of this. Just any brief comments or thoughts about, why that is? If not, we can just move on to the next project. So, and that's part of our process here tonight and at the next couple meetings is, we are kind of filtering these projects to get to that list of 15 or so million dollars. So, we might love all of the projects here, but ultimately we can't have them all on that final list. So this, I think, is helpful for us as we continue to move forward in this process as well. The next project proposal here is one of the larger redevelopments. This would be for the Cox Building, which is just across Mortimer Street from the transit center. So this would restore the building for 85 new apartments, 3 new retail storefronts on the ground floor. They are requesting $3.5 million in DRI out of a total project cost of just over $31 million. So that is a leverage of almost 8 times the public or private and other public sources compared to the DRI request. $3.5 million, which would be creating 85 new housing units for residents downtown. In terms of sponsor capacity, this developer has completed some similar renovations in Syracuse and other parts of upstate New York. Certainly addresses a couple DRI goals about building on the existing momentum for more housing downtown, attracting amenities around the transit center for transit users. They specifically talk about that in their proposal, some of the retail spaces there being obviously for anyone, but is certainly amenitizing the transit station area. Feedback, just interest in revitalizing an important historic building downtown, talk of how those ground floor spaces could be for more culturally diverse businesses. And as I mentioned at the beginning, that was something that came up in a number of comments that we heard of being, kind of thoughtful and sense almost kind of curating some of the ground floor tenants to be thoughtful about the type of downtown environment that's being created there. So what are our committee members' thoughts on this in terms of impact and cost benefit? So again, this was a $3.5 million DRI request for a total project cost of a little over $31 million to create 85 new units right next to the transit center. They do talk about that in their project proposal as well, that they would encourage transit use, they would have interior bike storage, they would have car share to help minimize residents' needs to have their own car, to live more of a car light or even car-free lifestyle downtown.
And these are market rate, remind me, these are not affordable units, these are market rate units?
I believe so. Sarah Bren, if you're on, if you can pull that up and report back in a minute or two, that would be helpful.
That's right, yeah, they're all market rate.
Great, thank you. It looks like about everybody has voted. So 3.5 on the impact scale, 3-ish on the cost benefit scale. Any comments on this one? You know, this again is one of a couple of the larger private development projects that are tackling, you know, a big building downtown, and it just costs a lot. And that's, you know, one of those considerations. So any thoughts on how this, you know, either the project on its own merits in terms of cost benefit, or how maybe it compares to some of the other project proposals that have a similarly high DRI request?
I would say that in spite of the lofty goals of helping people live a car-free existence, I don't think that's viable today in our community for a ton of reasons. And so I think that's very idealistic and not practical, particularly for market rate units. I think not providing parking is going to be a very difficult sell for those units.
Sarah Brent, if you have the project proposal up there, can you remind us if the sponsor said whether there would be parking in the Mortimer Street garage or anywhere else, or did they not mention that?
I don't believe there was a mention of parking.
Okay.
I can double check.
That can also be one of our follow-up questions with them as well. We had submitted a few questions and are waiting to hear back, so we'll just add that to our list.
Do they currently have site control?
Yes, I believe they do.
So the project closed,
the
deal to purchase closed. I will say that in spite of the parking concerns, the building is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So from that, and it's really striking downtown, very historical building.
I would just say the other night walking that block, there's certainly a dire need for some rehabilitation on that particular block.
This is Dana. Just one comment. It's not. It may not have been in their proposal, but the owners of the building have actually reached out to the city with an interest in purchasing the Mortimer Street garage. So that doesn't really mean anything other than we are going to be issuing a request for proposals in the next several weeks to determine what interest there is in the market for the purchase of that garage and possibly others. But you know, they don't certainly own it at this point, and it is something though that they are interested in acquiring.
Dana, I would add, and this is something we've all been talking about for a long time. One of the difficulties, the unintended consequences when a public parking garage is sold to a private developer is that no one else has access to it. And when it's city owned, there's a way to be fair about the allocation of blocks of key cards. So this is a policy decision that the city's got to be very comfortable with. As I know there's a lot of interest in purchasing that garage by other developers.
Yes, Heidi, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of interest in that garage and several others. And we do have a couple of major concerns. That's one, access, and the other is maintaining some reasonable cost of parking offset by whatever rate of return is necessary to handle the ongoing maintenance. So, you know, those are all concerns that we have, but, you know, we will be looking at all of that.
So we see where we landed here. I want to keep moving forward to make sure we can get through these. Next project on the list, the Paleo Archives and Exhibition Space. This is kind of a two-part proposal. One is to create a street level exhibition space in a currently vacant storefront that faces Liberty Pole Plaza next to the RIT City Space Gallery. And then in another location in Sibley Square to have the actual archives themselves, which would be available for study by local students, historians, and others for, Paley, who is a local artist who has done work internationally, sculpture, metalwork, other types of installations. So here you see leverage would be about 1.8, not quite 2. They're requesting 1 million out of a total project cost of 2.8, primarily to retrofit and bring that storefront up to contemporary standards. Their current assessment is that it's in such bad condition now that a typical tenant in the market's not going to be able to, renovate it and occupy it and make those financials work. So that's part of their justification for this. It really is the only proposal that we have that really highlights arts or culture in Rochester. So it helps to address that particular goal. And, interest on the public side, support that Paley is a very important part of Rochester's sort of arts scene and history there. But then, other survey results suggesting that this one has, kind of less excitement and enthusiasm than some other projects that are up for consideration. So we'll turn it back over to the LPC here for some thoughts. And as people are voting, if they just want to, talk a little bit out loud just in terms of how they view this particular proposal.
I love Albert and his work. I think this is a great project in general. If we're thinking about the DRI funding and transformation of this specific corridor, obviously the more storefronts we can fill, the better. But in terms of impact and transformation, this one will be a little more tucked in than some of the others.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on this one? So it looks like a lot of the voting here was more kind of towards the lower end of the impact and the cost benefit scale. And I think, as you pointed out, Lauren, project proposal for a single storefront versus reusing an entire building with multiple storefronts, the scale is certainly very different. So we'll move on. The next 4 projects, as we mentioned at the first meeting where we introduced these, are by the same project sponsor. We are getting some information back from them, continuing to get some additional information for them, and we'll be having some follow-up conversations about these 4 projects. So the first one here is the Edwards Building and Geothermal Cooperative. So here they are requesting 2.75 million out of a total project cost of 36 million to create 114 market rate units in the Edwards Building, which is kind of an L-shaped building. Part of it fronts onto St. Paul Street near the Cox Building, and then the view, really, I think possibly all of these views here on this screen are really more from Division Street or from Mortimer Street, so kind of inside that block. One interesting feature of this is the geothermal well field. They are looking to drill a total of 111 wells in the vacant lot, which is right next to the Edwards Building, and would be also next to the Mortimer Plaza project behind the garage. We got a little bit more information. They have started drilling test wells on the site so that they can more accurately get an estimate of what the total output and capacity of the full well field would be. So if you've been back there, you might have seen like there are some indications of wells that have been drilled, but they have not drilled the entire well field yet. They're working with a sustainable energy, but really geothermal design consultant on that design, as well as NYSERDA. The goal to be able to provide geothermal heat and cooling for the housing in this building to address decarbonization goals, as well as three other buildings in their portfolio, and potentially, depending on the capacity of the well field based on their test wells, potentially even offering to extend that to other buildings, but they have to kind of wait and see on that. So overall, this has 12 times leverage. The $2.7 million DRI request would help create 114 apartments, and a geothermal project that, as they describe it in their project proposal, is really kind of the first of its kind in the region of this scale and to be shared among multiple buildings. And so for Rochester to be able to demonstrate this as kind of a pilot project, is really, I think, a potentially very interesting and exciting angle to this. So obviously it addresses a couple of our DRI goals, mentioned from the public survey about, catalysts for similar types of development. The number of apartments is great. We need more geothermal in and around the city as well. So that was some of the input and support for that project. I'll turn it over to the LPC for thoughts on this one. Does anybody want to talk about why they rated this the way they did, either as a more transformative project or a less transformative one? That seems to be here. You see, we do have more of a split across the different voting levels. So any thoughts on that? I'd love to hear from somebody on either side of that. Yes, Lisa.
Hi, I kind of think this is an ideal project for CFA, DEC, or NYSERDA grant. They're well positioned to get money from all three. So I don't know, it just isn't visually transformational enough for us who have a very limited budget to transform Main Street.
Mm-hmm. I believe in their funding sources, they do mention a NYSERDA grant for carbon neutrality for the geothermal well field as part of their current funding sources. So any other thoughts on this? Maybe somebody who thinks that it is more on the transformative side? It's one that I thought might have a little more conversation around it.
Bill, can I just ask a question on this?
Sure.
I apologize if you mentioned this and I just missed it. Site control, there are no site control issues here, right? Isn't this building already owned?
Correct, yes, the Edwards building is. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So other pressing comments on that one, then we'll go a couple doors down to the Kresge project, and this is one that would front on Main Street next to the Main Street Commons. This would renovate the existing building there into a 28-room boutique hotel with restaurant and event space. Would also kind of spill out into that Main Street Commons space. They are requesting $1.75 million for this out of a total project cost of just over $11 million. You see the view in the top center here is actually along Division Street looking towards the Edwards building, the geothermal well on the right, and then on the left, the Kresge building and the Main Street Commons building here. As a leverage of almost 6 times. It would add to some of the dining uses downtown, part of hotel rooms for the convention center. Obviously has a direct relationship to the Main Street Commons project right next door, and does contribute to several of the DRI goals that we've talked about, reimagining East Main Street, attracting retail and commercial amenities, and also increasing, tourist visits, people, convention visitors coming into town for a couple days. So on this one, how do people see this one in terms of impact and cost benefit? This is one that's right on Main Street, next to Main Street Commons. Reusing a historic building for a hotel. It is the only hotel use that has been proposed in these DRI project proposals that we've received. Does anybody want to share their perspective on this one in terms of, looks like here, this one's rating a bit higher in terms of impact and potential downtown revitalization, a little bit lower on the cost benefit side. So does anybody want to share some thoughts on that?
I think because it faces Main Street in this main corridor, I think it's more visible in that way. This one and the last one are the same developer, and there's 4 projects total. Has anyone asked them to prioritize in terms of, developer capacity and what they could accomplish getting on the ground in 2 years?
Yes, that is one of our follow-up questions to them. We haven't been able to set up a phone call. They've had some other, I think, combination of out of country travel and then some family illness that they were dealing with. But we are looking to get a call scheduled with them in the next week or so to find out more about that and some other questions we have just about the project financials and how, these 4 would work together. Any other thoughts on this one in terms of impact downtown or the cost benefit evaluation?
This is
Lisa.
Lisa. I really think that this the Kresge idea supports the Commons idea, because hopefully they'll feed off of each other. They'll both activate both spaces, and I think they're complementary projects.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to that if, and we haven't talked at all about the hotel project, because I know that hasn't been publicly announced what the deal would look like. So the timing is probably off for this money. But if we end up expanding our convention center space and reducing the number of hotel rooms that we had at one time, then this may be an opportune situation to create a few more hotel rooms, because most of what's getting built now is boutique in size.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add, just from a tourism standpoint as well, that we don't currently have, or we are very limited in a more boutique product, and that is something that it attracts it's something that visitors are looking for. It may not necessarily be the typical convention attendee, but it is something that we just don't have. And to me, this, again, I can't remember maybe at least it was your point as well about this synergy with the Commons, like going back to the original goal and the mayor's remarks at the top of this meeting. I think a project like this would directly address any perceived blight. It would really help enhance vitality, and again, in tandem the Commons with this project. It's something you see in some of the cities that we aspire to see Rochester, in the same line as.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for those additional perspectives in terms of the overall hotel market downtown, especially related to the convention center. I know, I think it was maybe two meetings ago, we shared some of the findings from our kind of market analysis, and one of those was that the hospitality industry was going very strongly pre-COVID, was obviously one of the first hit very hard at the beginning of COVID, but that it has been starting to regain some of its losses, and projections do indicate that, you know, the hospitality market is going to fully recover to its pre-COVID level in the next year or two, and then keep growing beyond that. So, you know, this is potentially meeting sort of a piece of the market that is likely to keep growing. Next project up for discussion is the Mang and Schaefer project, which is actually two separate small buildings on Main Street with a space in between them that the sponsor is proposing to redevelop into a courtyard that could be used by those tenants. So you actually see here kind of its relationship to the Kresge building next door here in the Main Street Commons, you know, on the other side of that building. So this is one with 2.5 times leverage. They're requesting $750,000 in DRI funds for a total project cost of $2.6 million to help meet some of these DRI goals about addressing vacancy and blight on Main Street, creating more active ground floor uses. You know, this is one in the public comment, again, hearing sort of both sides of things. Some people wondering if the scale of it, just creating 4 apartments and 2 commercial spaces, means that it's really limiting its catalytic potential. You know, others observing that small, narrow buildings like this, similar to Main and Clinton, can be harder to redevelop because they still cost a lot of money, but you don't get as many units out of it. So maybe it's a good use of funding here. And then those other 2 comments at the bottom there, both concerned that it's only 4 units, and then others saying, great, brings Main Street more alive. So again, going back to this theme of kind of impact and project complexity, and where can the DRI be directed to sort of unlock, you know, both transformative potential and catalytic potential, you know, just comes up, I think, again with this project as well. So would be interested similarly from committee members to get a sense of your perspective on this, given the size of the building, but also its location, and, you know, how that relates to its impact and the cost benefit. We have most of our votes here. So anybody like to share their perspective on this project in terms of its impact on downtown revitalization, or the kind of cost benefit equation with the DRI request and the project funds?
I think this is a tough one because it's so small. And yet the price tag for DRI funding is not small relative to some of the other projects. So this is a difficult one. I don't think it's so much that it wouldn't be an important project. It's for the money that's being spent, since we can't fund everything.
Mm-hmm.
How does it stack up with the whole lineup?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right, Heidi, especially when you think about some of the other projects adjacent to that, that if they did, you know, go through, it could still spur this area. I think it is small, but I like the comments that I saw on the slide about, you know, the difficulty in trying to transform some of these spaces to make it more useful. But in the context of everything else, yeah, it's a little difficult to push this one forward on the transformative potential scale for me.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on this one? Right, we have, I believe, 3 projects left. Next up is the Clinton and Division project. So this is the last of the 4 projects submitted by Fortified and Dutton Properties. This one now is switching over to Clinton and Division Street. So this would redevelop the vacant building that's actually adjacent to the buildings that are in that Main and Clinton project portfolio. to develop it. And this is also one of one of the few that includes commercial space, and it's actually one of the few that does not have housing associated with it. So the proposal here is to create ground floor retail or service space, and then up on the second floor of the building, office space that could be used for tech or businesses or even artists to help diversify the downtown area. So they're requesting $750,000 out of a total cost of $2.8 million, which is about a 2.7 times leverage. It does address a couple of DRI goals about providing space for the local workforce and potentially incubator opportunities, as well as helping to attract neighborhood retail to the DRI area. You see some of the comments there as well. Across the Division Street alley is that Mortimer Street garage, but it is also located at one of the entrances to Division Street. So thinking of the future there and its role. So again, I think this is another interesting one to kind of think about its potential for downtown revitalization and also that cost benefit trade-off. So as people are voting, any specific thoughts or perspectives on this one?
Bill, I just had one comment. I don't know if it was in the proposal, I can't recall, but if you could just double check. At one point, the developer of this project is also the developer that owns the geothermal field, and the proposal was to extend coverage to this building from the geothermal field so that it would take advantage of that as well. So I don't know if they included that in the proposal or not, but that was an original goal of theirs.
In their proposal, they do mention that, and in the proposal, they say that it currently would not, their current approach would be that it would not be part of the geothermal well. They didn't specify if that was because of the distance from the wells or their current thought on the capacity of those. But they do state that it would have rooftop solar panels to help reduce energy consumption and to address decarbonization. So that's how they characterized it in their proposal that they submitted. Any other questions or comments on this one in terms of impact and cost benefit? It looks like it's skewing a little on the lower end of the cost benefit and kind of right middle in terms of impact. So if there are no comments on this one, we can move on. Got two left here. Next up is the health clinic at Sibley Square. So this is the clinic that is sponsored by his branches, which would create a storefront medical and mental health clinic to serve downtown patients, including a retail pharmacy. They state in the proposal that this is helping to address a sort of a lack of healthcare options in downtown, which is particularly important as more people are moving there. They are requesting $1 million out of a total project cost of 2.5. So it's about a 1.5 times leverage. In terms of public feedback, there were a couple very supportive comments about its location close to the transit center, also about its transformative ability, not necessarily in a physical sense, but just kind of addressing a social and healthcare need downtown. But then, also some concerns about how an independent provider can survive in this environment. Although, his branches does have several existing locations in Rochester, this would be expanding into a new downtown location. So with that, we'll turn it over to the voting here. This is one similar to the Paleo Archives project. It's one that is talking about occupying a vacant storefront downtown. So thinking about transformation, it's definitely a smaller scale, but it is addressing certain needs. The Paleo Archives is sort of the art and culture focus. This particular proposal is much more about, healthcare and access downtown. So any, who would like to share, just some thoughts or opinions on this one in terms of impact and cost benefit? Might just be getting towards the end of the meeting and we're running out of steam.
Phil, do we know who the medical center is that would be moving in?
His branch is the project sponsor. They own and operate several clinics in Rochester currently. So this would be growing into a new location. So his branches would would expand their medical care to this location. Right. So then the final project proposal in our list is proposal for a portfolio of buildings, the Granite, the Atrium, and the Gateway buildings, to renovate the 3 of them into mixed income housing, as well as commercial space. The 80,000 square feet of commercial space, I believe, is the largest of any of the project proposals we received. And in their proposal, they discussed that the Granite building would be the first project that they would lead with, and the Atrium and Gateway building would follow shortly after. They are still negotiating site control. They're anticipating closing, I believe, in July of 2022. So, we'll be checking for any updates that we can get from them on that. This sponsor is a developer who has, thousands of units in the pipeline in 10 states. So they've clearly, have the capacity to do this. They've done this before. They are requesting 4 to 4.5 million. And I think that is dependent somewhat on the funding sources for the Granite building. We can confirm that, but $4 to $4.5 million out of a total cost of 119 for all 3 projects. So it's both a large DRI request, but also a large total project cost. And that $4 million would help to create 143 new mixed income housing units. So you see some of the comments there, it's a big impact. It's a lot of units right on Main Street. Also concerned that it is a big part of the 9.7 available in DRI funding. So a couple questions there. Yes.
Question for you.
Sure.
If you could go back to the last slide. So it says housing for 400 people, not units. Do we know how many units, just out of curiosity?
I believe it was 143 units. Yes.
143 units. Okay, that make it apples to apples.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
Did I misunderstand you? Were you saying that the 4 to 4.5 million requested pertains to the Granite building or all 3?
Sarah
Brent, if you have that open, if you could clarify that.
Yeah, so the 4 million is for Atrium and Gateway, and the $500,000 is for.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
As presented. Sure, yeah, as presented in the proposal, $500,000 is for the Granite building and $4 million is for the Atrium and Gateway buildings.
Okay.
Again, is there a priority from the developer in terms of, you said they're going to start with the Granite building, but is there a reason they're all bulked together aside from the fact that they are currently owned by one person or one company? And is there a priority in what they can accomplish in the 2 years?
That I don't know if that was specified in the proposal. That can certainly be a follow-up with them. They described that the Granite building that would have the $500,000 in DRI funding request, that's a project they would pursue with more conventional debt financing, whereas the Atrium and Gateway buildings would have, I believe, low-income housing tax credits as part of it. So it's 2 kind of different approaches. And so I think that they see sort of the Atrium and Gateway as a pair, and then the granite building is kind of an adjacent property. But that can be, we'll follow up and see if we can get some more information on that as well. I'll flip over to our voting slide. If there are other questions, please certainly let us know.
Would you talk about parking for these? Is there interior parking inside the buildings?
Sarah Brent, can
There's
you?
not.
Yeah,
Nope.
there's not parking in the buildings. Did they mention their strategy for parking either in the Mortimer garage or some other way?
No.
So that'll definitely be one that we'll,
Yeah,
we'll
that's
follow
that's
up.
a good follow-up.
So as the votes are coming in this year, the evaluation higher on the impact side, a little bit lower on the cost benefit side. So interested to hear a little bit about that. Anybody want to talk a little bit about how they rated this, or what kind of stood out to them?
I feel like we kind of touched on this in again, similar to the public input, where like by the definition of downtown revitalization, and that especially that Main Street that's so visible, it would significantly enhance and revitalize Main Street just by the sheer number of people it would bring. But the cost is quite considerable, and I would be worried that there's still so much of a gap between the total project cost and the requested funding that that these dollars wouldn't really be enough to have them be successful in the venture.
Mm-hmm. I'm also concerned about the commercial space because the office market downtown is weak. And with remote work and a variety of other things that are impacting how much space companies are taking, we don't really know where all this is moving in the next few years. So any of the projects that's offering commercial space that's not now being used, I would look carefully at that.
I think those are both very good points for sure.
I would just add that our highest priority, I think, on this and what the mayor has stressed, the importance of addressing the blight and some of the really buildings that are in really rough shape. So these to me are beautiful buildings that have been somewhat maintained and active throughout the past 20 years. So it's a little different than some of the others that have completely fallen into shambles. That those would just be a higher priority for me in terms of really initiating some change.
I think those are all good points, and again, so as we've going through the projects one by one, I think it's very helpful, and then again, kind of zooming back out to think about the DRI area overall and how the different projects relate to each other in terms of the visual impact, the ability, also to catalyze additional investment in other nearby properties. Speaking to the blight question, that can hold adjacent property owners back from wanting to put a lot of money in. If that suddenly changes and gets improved, they may then decide, all right, this project I've been holding off on, now is the time to do it. So I think the catalytic impact of some of these projects is just another important consideration, together with transformative impact on revitalization, the look and feel of Main Street and the DRI area. So just all important considerations to keep in mind as we go forward over the next couple of meetings. So with that, we're running just a little late, but still within our meeting time here. Reminder, just in terms of next steps, project schedule, I mentioned this at the very beginning of the meeting. We are working towards end of July deadline to submit the final strategic investment plan. So before that, we need to finalize the list of projects that the LPC will be voting on. So we have another meeting coming up on June 15th. That'll be more of a discussion on some of the technical details, the pro formas, the cost estimates, where we think the costs are pretty well spot on, and where we might have raised some questions with the sponsors. And then really with a goal at the next meeting at the end of June to be able to finalize and to vote on the list of projects. And so just as kind of a preview of what that looks like based on our analysis and discussion with the LPC, we'll be developing a single list of projects for the committee to vote on as a single list of projects. It's not voting on individual projects, but on sort of a slate or a group of projects that get recommended for funding. And again, looking to be around 15 million if there are, as we had mentioned, with Rochester being one of the bigger cities to have a DRI award, several of these development projects have larger DRI requests. And so there is some flexibility to, have a total project list that's a little above 15 million if it includes, one or two of those larger request projects. Again, as we had said at the beginning, that just gives the state more flexibility should a project, not work out along the way. It would be able to award then the next highest rated project on the list. And then we will be reporting back very soon with just a meeting date for our third and final public meeting, which is really just kind of a presentation of the list of projects, sort of a capping of this process, and then start to talk a little bit about what implementation looks like in the future. So that's what's coming ahead. The next month is really an important part of this process, and then in July we'll be finalizing the strategic investment plan to submit that to the state at the end of July. With that, Sarah, Brent, I don't have the list of participants up, but are there any members of the public who have been listening in, and we can open it up for public comment period if there are?
We have two, and I've just granted them permission to unmute.
Great. So for those who've been listening in, thank you for your time. We hope this was helpful to hear. If you would like to make a comment, you can. You do not have to. So we'll just give you a brief minute for that, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, I'm going to call out one of the audience members is one of my coworkers from the Department of Communications, so she probably doesn't have anything to say.
That works. All right. Well, hearing no public comment then, I would just like to thank everybody for your time tonight, your participation in our poll, your questions and comments on these projects. All of this is helpful part of the process, and I think as we continue to think through, what this list of projects will look like that we'll be developing over the next month, it's all very helpful feedback for us. So we're looking forward to the next meeting to report back on some of the financial side of things and more of the numbers behind some of these projects. Look forward to continuing the conversation there. If there are committee members have any other questions or comments, certainly reach out to our team. We look forward to talking with you again in a few weeks. So any other final questions or comments from the committee or any city staff?
Bill, just one quick process question for those LPC members that weren't able to participate today.
Mm-hmm.
Will the team be reaching out to them to go through a similar voting process or provide an opportunity for them to score the projects?
Yes, we'll share this presentation with them. We'll provide just a survey link so that they can weigh in as well. That way we'll be able to hopefully get input from all of the committee members on these that we can take into consideration.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I will thank everybody again for your time, and we will see you again in a few weeks. Thank you very much. Have a good night.